In 1988, living in India was the son of a local leader, a young married man by the name of Singrata, also called Bana, who at the time was in his early 20s. Singh loved to ride a bullet motorcycle and never traveled anywhere without it. He adored this motorcycle and he would always travel to the city of Jodhpur from his native home of Shatila almost every day, riding in it. On a certain day in 1988, he was returning to his village of Shatila from his in-laws' house in Pali, riding on his beloved motorcycle on that dark evening. While speeding and enjoying his ride, casually increasing the gear speed, he was about to divert and make a sharp turn when he immediately lost control and crashed into a nearby tree. Unfortunately for Singh, he died on the spot, but miraculously, his beloved motorcycle survived the deadly accident after falling into a nearby ditch. As the locals gathered to witness the horrific incident that has just happened, the attention of the local police would soon be called to the scene, where they took the motorcycle from the scene to the station as they officially registered the case, while Singh's body was taken to be deposited at the mortuary. The next morning, when the police officers came to their normal duties and were looking through Singh's files, they made a very notable discovery. They noticed that the motorcycle, which they had kept within their station, was no longer where they parked it. Soon, the officers began thinking that maybe another one of them within the station had parked it somewhere else, but on searching the entire premises, they couldn't find the vehicle, and further questioning would reveal that no one had touched it before they left that night, as the officers began to defend themselves. They started thinking about the possibility of it being stolen, so they began making inquiries around the town till they got a tip-off from some of the locals. What they heard just seemed surprising to them, to say the least. So they made their way to the location where the motorcycle was said to have been seen that day. And sure enough, there it was on the ditch, just by the side of the road, which turned out to be the accident site of Singh. Then again, the police impounded the motorcycle and took it to the station once again, but this time making sure to empty the fuel tank and putting it under lock and key. The next morning, the police came to the station and once again discovered it to be missing. Further investigation would puzzle the police officers, as the motorcycle had been found at the site of Singh's accident. Once again, they arrived at the scene and the motorcycle was retrieved and taken to the police station. At this point, the officers began to think that maybe someone was playing a prank on them, so they ended up shelling the vehicle tires and locking the motorcycle once again within a room to avoid it from going missing. The next morning, when the local police came to their duties and proceeded to check, they noticed that the motorcycle had once again gone missing. The police officers, without asking any other further questions, just got up and got to the scene of the accident, and sure enough, the motorcycle was seen at the ditch. They took it again and packed it securely within their station and locking it up again. The next morning, it had gone missing. This continued several times, as legend had it that the motorcycle kept returning to the same ditch, which ended up thwarting every attempt by the police to keep it at the local police station, where the motorcycle always returned to the same spot before dawn. It was just a matter of time before the police knew they just had to give up, but not before sending information to Bana's family about the strange happenings. Seeing the seriousness of the matter, Bana's father, by the name of Sri Jog Singh, including the rest of his family who were still mourning his death, thought that maybe it was the wish of his son's dead soul that the motorcycle be left around the area. So a few weeks later, they proceeded to park the motorcycle near the same tree which Singh's motorcycle had collided with. The locals who witnessed the strange set of events would begin to see what happened as a miracle. That the motorcycle, which was a beloved treasure to Singh, survived the horrific accident that killed him, and now was always returning to the scene of the crash. And soon, news of the miracle motorcycle spread to nearby villages. More reverence towards the vehicle would also come, as people began to tell stories of how Ombana still rides on the highway and helps people in need. This was after one driver, whose vehicle skidded and crashed in a ditch, claimed that the spirit of the now deceased Singh came and saved him as he lay there bleeding from his injuries. Later, the local population got together and decided to build a temple at the accident site within the Indian state of Rajasthan, located 20 kilometers from Pali and 53 kilometers away from Jodhpur, on the Pali to Jodhpur highway, which is near Singh's hometown of Shatila. It was within the temple that they began to worship the motorcycle as a miracle. The locals also believed that the motorcycle was possessed by the spirit of Ombana, hence the reason why it was being worshipped as a deity, which they would name Ombana or Bullet Baba. Over time, the shrine grew in size and popularity, and it became known as the Temple of Bullet Baba. Those who have visited have told on how approaching the temple, there were amazing scenes of many locals, nearby villagers, travelers and other tourists stopping by to pay their respects to the Bullet Baba. The temple itself being a small structure but easy to spot, as it is adorned with various offerings from the devotees such as incense sticks, flowers, coconut, sweets and liquors, with the main offering being beer of the Bullet brand. It is not sure as to why and how the offering started, but everyone could be seen carrying a bottle of liquor into the temple, as people sprinkle alcohol on the bike as an offering to their guardian angel of road safety, who is said to help distressed travelers. An eternal flame is also kept at the shrine, and those who pass by stop to bow their heads and leave offerings in honor of the helpful spirits, since it is said that a person is in for a dangerous journey or might not reach their destination with all their body parts intact if traveling through the Pali to Jodhpur highway without stopping to worship the Bullet Baba. At the site, vehicles passing by refrain from honking as an offering to the Baba, and devotees will tie a red thread on the motorbike and also apply the signature India Tilak mark on the bike, which is a sign of prosperity, and with local people also singing folk songs in the name of Ombana. The locals believe that Ombana's spirit is still protecting them from accidents and other dangers on the road, and they attribute their safe travels to him. Many truck drivers and motorcyclists stop at the temple to seek his blessings before embarking on long journey. The temple was also said to have a fascinating history of miracles, as there have been instances where other people who were involved in accidents were miraculously saved, and they attribute their survival to Ombana's blessings. Not just that, there are also stories of people who have been cured of illnesses after visiting the temple. The motorcycle at the shrine is said to be more than just a symbol of Ombana's spirit. It is also believed to have supernatural powers, as it has been known to start on its own and move around the temple, even though it has no engine or fuel. Some worshippers have even claimed that they have seen Ombana's spirit riding the motorcycle at night. Since then, with the motorcycle being a symbol of the danger and risk that comes with riding on Indians' roads, the shrine still serves as a reminder to all those who visit to drive safely and to seek the blessings of Ombana before embarking on long journeys. Indians love miracles and legends, especially in the age of technology, and almost anyone or anything can be elevated to the stature of a revered entity. But a motorbike was the last thing one can imagine seeing as an object of people's devotion. Till this day, the motorcycle is always constantly cleaned and worshipped every day. Visitors had also reported the site as being a unique and unforgettable experience. The tree that caused Ombana's death remains ornamented with offering of bangles, scarves, and other local decorations. A tradition which is said to bring good luck and protection to those who participate. Almost 4 decades later, the story of Sangrato and the strange story behind his motorcycle has become a symbol of faith and devotion among the people. The legend of Ombana and the temple of Bullet Baba, which has Ombana's bust and his bullet, still serves as a unique and fascinating part of the Indian culture and tradition. About 5 a.m. on the 2nd of July 1951 in St. Petersburg, Florida, a landlady known as Mrs. Pansy Carpenter suddenly woke up in an apartment complex in Tampa Bay. She thought maybe she smelled smoke coming into her house through the windows, thinking that the smoky smell was coming from a water pump in her garage, which had been overheating for quite some days. She stepped out from her bed and walked over to the garage outside her room and then turned off the pump, then went back to sleep without thinking much about it again. Around 8 a.m. that morning, so 3 hours later, someone knocked on her door, and which made her to wake up and answer to the call. The knock on the door had come from a telegraph delivery boy who had a telegram message to deliver to one of her tenants. So Mrs. Carpenter collected the telegram, signed the message herself. Then after the delivery boy left, she walked over to deliver the message to the tenant, who was living in the same building. On arriving at the house, she knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She then knocked again and waited, but there was still no response. So she proceeded to try and open the door. However, upon trying to hold the doorknob to try and gain access, she quickly removed from the knob. She noticed that for some unknown reasons, that the knob, which was unusually warm to the touch or cold, depending on the season, was now very hot. This was very unusual for Mrs. Carpenter, so she tried to open the door once again, but now placing some piece of clothing over the knob. But once again, it wouldn't open. It had been locked from the inside, hence indicating the possibility that someone was actually still inside the apartment. So, suspecting that something might be wrong, she called the police authorities in Florida, who came over to the apartment so they could help her do a welfare check on her tenant living within the apartment. Few minutes later, they arrived at the location and the police would knock once again on multiple occasions. And after there was no response, the police, together with some construction workers around the vicinity, forcefully made their way into the apartment. And on getting inside, they felt a dreadful silence, and with the atmosphere inside being much warmer than outside, even though some of the windows were still wide open. Then, as they slowly made their way to see the occupant, and with complete horror, the officers and the workers' eyes became wide. They had discovered a human left foot laying close to a pile of ashes. While it was clear that the fire had been the source that had caused a minor damage within this home, with the exception of a nearby chair and a human foot, which still had a footwear on it, there was no way to tell what had happened. But Mrs. Carpenter would later identify to the police as the body part supposedly belonging to her tenant, a woman by the name of Mrs. Mary Risa. Mary was born in Columbia, Pennsylvania, United States on the 8th of March 1884. At the time, she was a 67-year-old recent widow with one adult male child. Shortly after the death of her husband, she relocated to St. Petersburg, Florida to be closer to her son and her granddaughters. On the evening of the 1st of July 1951, so the night before her grim discovery, she had spent some of her time receiving visits from her son, who was a doctor called Richard, and also Mrs. Carpenter, her landlady, who was present with them on that night. She had taken 2 sleeping pills and later told her son Richard that she would take 2 more and have a cigarette before going to bed. That same night, she had also expressed her concerns to her son about a trip she had planned to take back to Pennsylvania. She had been looking forward to getting away from the hot weather in Florida and was worried that the trip would be cancelled. After their discussion, plans and arrangements, at around 9 p.m., her son made sure everything she needed was taken care of and then kissed her goodbye before he left. But before Richard left, she had changed into a nightgown and was sitting on a chair smoking a cigarette and with 2 electric fans pointing towards her. It was cruelly ironic that the telegram that led to the discovery of her remains came from a friend in Pennsylvania, informing her that the trip had been planned and organized. But now, as the police and some of the construction workers were staring down at her burnt remains and left foot, they had also found that the chair and the 5-foot wide circle of carpet immediately underneath the chair she was sitting that night had been burned away, revealing the cement floor, but the rest of the apartment showed little damage. There was soot on the walls and ceiling at a height of about 4 feet. A few plastic items had been softened by heat. The bed sheets were still white, and one of the nearby wall sockets had melted, stopping a clock that was plugged into it at 4:20 a.m. A pile of old newspapers stacked on the floor nearby, however, were also left undamaged. With these exceptions, on looking through the entire apartment, nothing else had been touched by the supposed flames which left the ashes. And to make matters more bizarre than what was being seen, her skull, which was found among the ashes, had survived the blaze, but had shrunk considerably to the size of a teacup. But further investigations would later reveal that the presumed skull was just a lump of Mary's ashes, which had been piled up with her other burnt remains. At the time, this strange discovery puzzled the FBI, science experts, and so many other academics within America for so many reasons. If it wasn't for the one remaining left foot in a black silk slipper, some part of her spine, a melted fat from her body, which were stuck on the carpet below where she sat, nobody would have been able to tell that they were looking at a person's remains. Mary's body had been almost completely cremated in the middle of her living room. During the subsequent investigation, it would be revealed that there was no sign of a break-in or burglary or any other outside influence in the apartment. The authorities were stumped and began to call in consultants to help. So on July 7th, 1951, so 5 days after the discovery, a St. Petersburg police would send a box of evidence from the scene to an FBI director in Washington, D.C. In the box, he included the glass fragments found in the ashes, smoke samples, rubble from the walls and floor, some segments of the burnt chair, 6 small objects thought to be teeth, a section of the carpet with the melted body fat, and the surviving shoe which she wore on her left foot. The police officer also left a note saying, "We request any information or theories that could explain how a human body could be so destroyed and the fire confined to such a small area and so little damage done to the structure of the building and the furniture in the room not even scorched or damaged by smoke." With the strange circumstances now surrounding her death, different theories began to emerge as to be the possible reason behind it. Possible paranormal explanations were introduced, such as the cause of the fire being from a ball of lightning or some sort of fireball or explosives being thrown into the home. A letter coming from someone to the police claimed they had seen such phenomenon happen before, but FBI agents found no evidence that suggested lightning had struck Mary or the building, as all of the fuses in the apartment were still intact, and investigators had not been able to detect any other substances that could have started the blaze. Another theory hinted to the possibility of murder. It stated that the fire was deliberately started with termite bombs and kerosene, but the coroner's office denied the possibility, claiming that all of the items would have left a distinct odor, none of which were discovered on the scene. Some people also hinted of the possibility of the body, which contains methane gas, to have been responsible for the combustion, but this theory seemed to lack, as methane in human intestines has no ignition source and can't burn in the absence of oxygen. And even if it did, it doesn't produce a flame hot enough or long enough to ignite human flesh, and the human nervous system is simply incapable of producing a voltage high enough to cause that much heat. In addition, the human body itself is remarkably resistant to burning since it's made up of 2/3 of water. But experts would also hypothesize that there are subatomic particles called pyrotrons in the human body that, when agitated by stress, make people more likely to burst into flame, as was seen with the strange death of Mrs. Reza. But this particular hypothesis was deemed implausible, as pyrotrons have never been shown or proven to exist. Then another interesting theory would emerge, the theory being called a spontaneous human combustion, a scenario whereby a human body goes up in flames from within and without an apparent external source of ignition. This theory had been implied as a cause of death in a number of documented cases from different times and countries, where police have found burnt corpses but without an external source to ignite the flames. An estimated 200 cases or more have been found throughout history, and victims are often elderly, sick, or under the influence of alcohol, which scientists explain might be the reason why they have not been able to escape the flames. Furthermore, investigation of all the most famous cases of spontaneous human combustion, however, shows that there was in fact in each instance a nearby ignition source, a space heater, an electric arc, matches, or in Mary Rissa's case, a cigarette. But the other defining characteristic of spontaneous human combustion is the completeness with which the body is burned and the lack of any fire damage to the surrounding area. This, more than anything else, gave an invitation to the paranormal claims surrounding the phenomenon. According to the body burning experts, clearly, this was no ordinary fire. They stated that it takes a heat between 1400 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, burning for several hours to cremate a human being, which is far, far more heat than a match, candle, or cigarette is capable of. And yet, according to both a study cited by the British Medical Journal and a more recent survey from the Journal of Clinical Forensic Medicine, suspected cases of spontaneous human combustion reduce the victim's body to ash, although occasionally the deceased hands and feet survive. Even stranger, the victims surrounding in these cases are largely unharmed, even if they consist of flammable materials, which seems counterintuitive given how intense the necessary fires must be. Hence, experts would ask that with a fire that hot, burning for that long, why wasn't the rest of the apartment, if not the entire building, burned down? Why just her body? And with this, investigators would rule out spontaneous human combustion as being the cause of her death. But puzzled scientists, including the FBI, also had another theory similar to the combustion theory, with it being that Mrs. Rissa had been incinerated by the wick effect. The theory is that the human body can become an inside-out candle. The person's clothes are the wick, while the body fat is the wax or flammable substance which keeps the blaze going. Limbs may be left intact because of the temperature gradient, with the bottom half of the body being cooler than the top. Since Mary was a known user of sleeping pills, they hypothesized that as the pills kicked in while she was still smoking on her chair, the drowsy effect resulted to her dropping the cigarette which fell on her, and with the fire from the cigarette lighting up her night clothes, also lighting up her body in the process. She weighed about 170 pounds, so they believed that once her body began burning, that there was enough fat to allow for complete cremation to take place throughout that early morning, allowing hot air and smoke to rise to the top of the room, then outside the open windows. This was supposedly the smoke Mrs. Carpenter, her landlady, who lived in the same building, had inhaled that early morning when she woke up thinking it was an overheated water pump. This theory was also supported by Rissa's daughter-in-law, and the investigators then decided that this kind of accidental death was the most plausible theory. But an anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania would later disagree, saying that if this theory was really the cause of her cremation, instead of her skull shrinking, it should have rather exploded. Her cremation, he also believed, would have required several thousand degrees Fahrenheit over the course of several hours and should have caused more damage within the apartments. Months after further FBI investigation trailed off, the police finally listed the cause as, in quotes, a neglected cigarette. A portion of Mary Rissa's ashes were later buried next to her deceased husband in Pennsylvania, where she was born, while the rest stayed with her offspring in St. Petersburg. Rissa's family would later say they still felt her presence since the incident, at least up until they got rid of her old furniture. It's now been more than 70 years since Mary's strange demise, and to this day, no one knows for sure what happened, and the newspaper accounts would refer to her as, in quotes, the Cinder Lady. Whether it be a fireball, murder, spontaneous human combustion, the wick effect, or any other different theories, we may never have a definite answer. A 37-year-old Rosangela Almeida dos Santos woke up feeling confused. All Rosangela could remember was being at a hospital bed in her hometown of Riachão das Neves in the northeast of Brazil. It was all dark around her, and as she tried to sit up to stand, her head hit against a physical substance right above her head. She began to feel above her to see what it was and make her way through, but she couldn't. She was still laying down. She then noticed she wasn't breathing properly and then proceeded to remove the soft white material within her ears and nose. She began to push harder, also pounding heavily on what she made out to be a wooden roof. But still, she couldn't punch through it. Immediately, she began to panic, and to make matters more severe, she felt her heart beginning to hit faster as she tried to feel her way through inside what seemed like a tiny tunnel. She couldn't understand what was going on and how she got into this tiny enclosure. She also began to wonder how many days she had been within this tiny enclosure, which didn't even give her enough room to move about. At that moment, she then remembered her mother, siblings, husband, and those close to her. She wasn't about to give up anytime soon, and she desperately continued to punch and scrape her way through using her fingers and also pounding the wooden roof with her foreheads and punching as hard as she could. She discovered that all efforts were in vain, as she still couldn't find a way out. As her heart rate began to increase, her breathing also became rapid, and she continued shouting and banging at the wooden item above her head and trying her best to scream louder for help. But help wasn't coming. To make matters worse, the sequence dragged on for hours and hours and hours, but there was still no response from anyone. The longer she was within this dark wooden space, the more she felt herself getting weaker, warmer and clammy, her skin now all soaked in her own sweat. Hours into this ordeal, she became totally confused as she began to suffer from shortness of breath. She started groaning, and with each groan, getting weaker. It was few minutes later, after these groans, when she felt totally unconscious. On the 9th of February 2018, people living within Riachawoda's Nevis alerted the family on how they had been hearing screams and bangs coming from where they lived. This family, for the past few weeks, had been mourning the death of a loved one, but when they heard some stories from the people living in that street, they immediately knew they had to see things for themselves. A woman by the name of Jamana, together with the rest of her family members, hurriedly made their way that evening at a cemetery where they had buried a relative, and with the help of some local men within the city, a tomb was immediately broken down within the cemetery, and a heavy wooden coffin within it was taken out and the lid removed. Immediately they looked inside. What they saw confirmed their worst fear. A terrifying nightmare, to say the least. It would turn out that the woman Germana was Rosangela's mother, who had just buried her daughter some weeks ago after she was declared dead in the hospital. Prior to being declared dead in the hospital by the doctors, she was married but didn't have children, and since she was 7 years of age, she had reportedly been said to have been suffering from fainting spells within the hot city of Brazil. She was also dependent on anticonvulsant medicines to keep her convulsions in check. On January 2018, Rosangela had been at a hospital in Brazil's northeastern state of Bahia for a week after being rushed there by her family with severe fatigue. She would later go on to suffer 2 cardiac arrests before being declared dead by the doctors on the 28th of January 2018, with her death certificate citing the cause of her death as, in quotes, septic shock. Her family had said their final goodbyes at a wake held that night, and since embalming isn't carried out in most Latin countries, without wasting any time, she was buried in a concrete tomb at the municipal cemetery in her hometown the following day, which was on the 29th of January 2018. But now, fast forward to that late evening of the 9th of February 2018, so 11 days after her burial, as the news came of shouts and groans being heard at the tomb within the cemetery where she was buried, it quickly spread around the city, and with the events of that night being recorded on video while her coffin was being opened, there were more than 500 people who came there and packed the cemetery, as everyone wanted to see things for themselves too. Residents living on the streets next to the cemetery who raised the alarm after hearing screams, banging and groans coming from inside Rosangela's stone tomb were also present, as the family proceeded to break the tomb and the wooden coffin, which contained Rosangela's body.
É vivo ainda, moço.
Tira a mulher, vem vivo. Chama essa Pode tirar.
Chama a SAMU, moço. Vai.
Deixa aqui.
Chama a SAMU aí, rapaz.
Liga, gente, passa a luz.
Calma aí, não mexe pra lá.
Calma aí,
não mexe aí não.
Calma aí, deixa aí, calma aí, moço. Calma aí, deixa aí.
Calma aí, moço.
Solta aí.
Puxa aí, galera.
Ela tá
Sério, liga pra SAMU.
Tá vivo, cada dia deixa aí, meu irmão.
Tá vivo.
Tá vivo depois de um bocado de dia desse aí.
Nem fedece no carro.
Tira, gente, o trem.
A mulher tá viva.
Tira essa capa aí, ó. Tira esse trem aqui de cima dela.
Vai pegar aqui, pega esse aqui, vamos pegar aqui, ó.
While at the scene, a woman also narrated how many people had heard muffled screams during one of the nights of the screaming. The woman had also been right in front of the tomb when she heard loud banging noises coming from within it. But unfortunately at the time, she thought it were the kids who were playing around the cemetery that were playing a joke on her. She then heard a groan, then another groan, after which she stopped. Little did any one of them know that it was Rosangela, who was still alive underneath the wooden coffin that had been nailed shut with concrete nails, trying desperately by whatever means possible to fight for her life. With her coffin later opened, her mother, Germana, had found injuries to her hands and forehead, which she later said were not there when they had buried her earlier. The cotton wool, which had been placed in her ears and nostrils, was also out, and these were the soft white material Rosangela had earlier pulled out from her body when she noticed she wasn't breathing properly. There were also scratches underneath the lid and also blood stains all over the inside casket. According to the mother, it was evident that her daughter had tried to open the lid and fight her way out, as even the nails that had been hammered inside the wooden coffin were loose as they had been pushed upward. Now, even though the climate in Brazil is naturally hot, lots of people also touched her foot, and everybody will report her body feeling warm to the touch, which is still uncharacteristic of someone who had been confirmed dead just less than 2 weeks prior. She wasn't cold to the touch, hence indicating the possibility that from the moment of her being unconscious but still alive while in her burial casket till she later regained consciousness, all while still in the coffin, the process had spanned for at least 11 days since she was supposedly laid to rest. Some people would also ask to call an ambulance as others touched the woman's feet and comment on how warm she felt. But even when the ambulance arrived, sadly, it would be confirmed that she was already dead by the time the family members smashed open the tomb. This once again broke the family as she had to be confirmed dead for the second time days later, before being embalmed this time around and buried again weeks later. Since the nightmarish discovery, as weeks turned to months, although the completely devastated family stated that their aim was not to cause any problems or to accuse the doctor in the hospital of being the cause of the death, the family, who believed that Rosangela was declared dead in what was believed to be a medical error, would report the incident to the police, as they believed that there was no way a person can be buried for 11 days and still be warm. The police chief, who led the earlier investigation, began to take statements from the family members and other witnesses and told the family that if need be, that they would exhume Rosangela's body from her grave so they can get to the bottom of what really happened. A spokesman for the hospital, which declared her dead, would also promise to provide all necessary information requested from them to the family and authorities. But when the medical information came out, they stated that the reason for her body still being conserved after it was retrieved from the tomb was allegedly due to a liter of an embalming chemical known as formaldehyde, which was applied on her body after her death, which slowed down deterioration. They also stated that the antibiotics which were applied to Rosangela during her hospitalization, including the rainy weather, favored the slower decomposition. Whether this was true or not, no one knows for sure. But months following the police investigation, they would later conclude that the reports of screams and knocking noises could merely be, in quotes, rumors, Why the civil authorities denied the claims that Rosangela was buried alive, even with all the evidences that were pointed out. And with this came a strange close to the case.